Thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is House General and Housing. Today's Friday, February 21, 2025. And this is our first testimony of the day relating to our committee bill, House General and Housing Committee bill. We have two witnesses, both of whom I think know the committee. So I think we'll dispense with introducing the committee again. And Josh, are you going to start?
Sure. We're both gonna. Thanks for having us again, Josh Hanford, Director of Intergovernmental Relations at the League of Cities and Towns.
Samantha Sheehan, Municipal Policy and Advocacy Specialist for the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Thank you.
And yeah, we were in earlier, sort of, I think, an overview of what the league does, what our thoughts are in general to the sort of original sort of governor's housing proposals. And we, again, are giving some brief overview and then specifically the questions you asked us to talk to in your current draft committee bill as we understand the versions. We just wanted to leave some information with you all about infrastructure once again, that, we did a survey recently with 35 municipalities responding that all have plans around infrastructure right now. And you can see there on the screen what the results are, but the variety of funding in these projects, 28% have some federal funding, 16 have state funding, 16 have federal funding. They have bonds, they have grants, they have different debt sources. The average costs, you can see about 14 million. And the completion dates are in the next 5 years. This is infrastructure that housing will be built on and address the needs. And there's a massive gap in what they've already received and what they need to pull these projects off. 240 million of expected cost to pull these projects off. We're not sure where that's going to come from. I don't know that the voters are going to be able to take on more debt at the local level and add that to their property taxes. And it's part of the big discussion this session that we have to have everywhere we go around housing, because the reforms we've made to Act 250 and municipal zoning require there to be more infrastructure to support the housing that we all said we wanted and the crisis to meet the crisis we're in.
Can I ask a quick question? The 240 million, that's just for plans that have already kind of started. That's not, I'm thinking of Fairfax, where in order for us to really develop anything else, we need to upgrade our wastewater. And I know we don't have plans for that.
Yes.
That wouldn't be included, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
These are essentially projects where there's been a voter action initiating a project. So they may be in initial planning and engineering, or they may be in like phase 2 design, or even construction. But these are projects that are planned and underway. Thank you.
Go ahead.
There are two related questions. Can you give us a picture of the 35 municipalities that this is talking about? What size do they range from? Are they isolated or connected to other towns and cities? Do they already have infrastructure that just needs to be upgraded, or do they not have infrastructure?
The way this question was phrased is we said, do you plan to create or expand? So it's both expansions to existing water and wastewater, as well as new projects. So for example, Waitsfield has like a new from scratch project that they've partially bonded for, have some grant money, but I know Waitsfield has a significant funding gap for their planned project right on Route 100.
So they did demarcate whether it was new. Did you keep track of whether it was new or upgrade?
No, we didn't.
Huh.
And as for who the towns are, we certainly have that in the response data, but I don't have it at my fingertips.
I would say it's fair that it's a variety of size communities all across the state.
It's all across the state.
Yeah, we had all representation in the responding municipalities. We had all 14 counties.
Thank you.
And those that average cost is truly an average of 14 million. It's not the median.
The median is 10.
It's 10 million. That's interesting.
Yeah, I chose to exclude, we had one responding project that was for a fire district and one for a village. Those were expansion projects. They were both just about 5 million on the nose, but they weren't sort of like statistically relevant. So we chose to provide you the average and median for the municipalities.
But you didn't have a lot of towns coming in at like 100,000 or 300,000. or
Not
anything like
even
that.
close, no.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's all in the multi-million.
Do you, two of the, I mean, so under consideration here and in the Commerce Committee and elsewhere are three different infrastructure addressing devices. One is tax increment financing, in which we have two proposals floating around out there and variations there too. The second is we think simpler, which is simply tax abatements. Have you guys considered tax abatements? Do you have any thoughts on how your towns would view a system which would allow towns to apply a tax abatement to a particular development?
Yeah, I would say we need both. There are situations in some smaller communities where it's a very specific development deal that a tax abatement would fill the gap. We've had that as an ask to authorize municipalities for decades, really. We've had little hits of it over time, and there's some recent legislation that has always allowed municipalities to give up their 20-30% of municipal taxes, but not to access the majority of the taxes, which is the statewide education, that's the level of resources needed to make these deals work. The other two infrastructure, the Governor's Spark and the HIT program, they're variations of the type of need we see out there. Some HIT is just focused on housing, mixed income and mixed use. The Spark is broader than that and builds off the existing TIF sort of framework. We believe that they both have a place and they both would serve municipalities well, maybe different sizes and scales of development. What we do believe is that we need something. And if it is the more hit version that's scaled down, one area that we think maybe could broaden the use and demand out there is that HIT program also allow flood sort of recovery and resiliency to be eligible. Right now it doesn't, whereas the Spark does. And for communities, up and down the Winooski Valley and across the state to do what we really need to do to build the housing of the future, to keep them safe, to have them be sustainable and vibrant communities, they're going to need a resource like that, a TIF-like instrument that will build new neighborhoods and new and so that would be an element that if HIT is the preferred model, we would sort of steal from Spark and maybe broaden the uses and the number of communities that could benefit from having that flexibility.
It's a point of information for you. I think ultimately whatever is done here is going to happen in the Commerce Committee. I mean, we've been working with the Commerce Committee, we've had joint hearings, but I think in terms of literally the language, et cetera, will come out of Commerce. And that's a suggestion they should, one way or another, the chair perhaps, or the vice chair should hear from you in addition to us. The last area of the third, if you will, device would be to make it easier to use assessment districts. And this is might be particularly useful when there is tax abatement, but to use an assessment district to do very project-specific, smaller financing, it's used in a lot of states. And one of the questions there, as you probably know, an assessment district is created by the select board of the appropriate town or its governing body. The bond vote, if they want to issue bonds, is by the town as a whole, which makes us an outlier in Vermont. Because in most states, if there is an election at all, it is only the property owners affected. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, sorry, I'm writing myself a quick note, so I don't forget. We confront the question of assessment districts as a solution to more than one problem of government financing. Generally speaking, municipalities currently have the authority to create special assessment
Right.
districts. This is an informed speculation, but they are not often deployed because it is not the way municipalities generally provide expansive government services that meet a broad public benefit. We don't like to make decisions that isolate the cost of a broad public service on a few property owners. Those are very hard and contentious decisions to make at the local level. It can be hard to win those votes on the ballot. And one component of the HIT proposal that is really positive and I think would help it have broad adoption for all types of municipalities is that it really places it does not socialize the cost of the development and the infrastructure for the new development on current ratepayers and taxpayers. It puts the cost on the development. So of course that would be passed through in some way, some piece of that would be passed through to the new future residents of that housing project. But most of it would be carried through this debt financing mechanism from the future tax. So there are infrastructure financing tools that put the cost on the developer, which pass through to the future buyers or renters. There are financing tools that socialize the cost broadly across Vermont, if we're taking from the general fund, across the municipality, if we're taking from the municipal property tax and like a geo bond. But what is cool about HIT is that it does a little bit of both, and you're not adding that sort of rent pressure right off the top, but you're also not asking current property taxpayers and current water ratepayers to flip the bill up front before even realizing the benefit on their grant list.
What I think you might think about is what people are talking about here is a third assessment device that would be limited to new housing developments that are very specific. And this is the way it's often applied in other states. The only people who would pay are the developer and then the inhabitants of the new district. So if it's for, say, sidewalks and a playground and parks within a new development, then the assessment would only be on that. A lot of people find it somewhat strange that taxpayers who are not going to pay any taxes or be assessed vote on whether other taxpayers should be assessed. Either strange because they might vote yes when the taxpayers thus diluting the vote of the taxpayers who are affected, who want to vote no, or as has happened recently in Vermont, in one town in particular, the developer of the area affected supported the bond and the select board had approved the assessment district, but then the townwide vote was used as a campaign device against the development and turned down. So we're wondering if the way to do that might not be to shrink the vote to the property owners affected.
If I'm understanding the proposal correctly, although I think probably the best folks to talk to would be those on the financing side to understand
yeah.
how this would help or hurt a deal. But I'm thinking, when I was working for the city of Burlington, we were endeavoring through the Cambrian Rise project, very complex project, very large scale development, the largest in Vermont. And I'm thinking about, I think we could have passed that measure, obviously speculating on hypothetical. I'm wondering if it would have been in conflict with the inclusionary zoning ordinance, like the goals to have mixed use and mixed income in the development. Like, I'm wondering if that type of special assessment district may be in conflict with the work there to have a significant number of new perpetually affordable units, both for homeownership and for rental, and those types of amenities that make that a really vibrant addition to the broader neighborhood
You
there.
mean the assessment would eventually be paid by property owners and would add to the burden of their rent when what we need is lower rent, is what you're worried about right
And
there.
maybe to the extent that it would make it not possible to build those perpetually affordable units at the scale and density of that project. But I think it could work for projects of a certain density and size. And I think we're generally in favor of more financing tools and more authorities for municipalities to develop these types of agreements.
Great, thank
Yeah.
you. One of the other, I'm just running through some issues which have come up through various sources to this committee and are just at their preliminary stage of consideration. As you may know, there was just recently a report which was addressing the problem of vacant or abandoned homes in Vermont, of which there are a surprising number. And one of the proposals is to create a statewide land bank. Have you, and we're looking at, I don't think, given the report, that it's ready for legislation, but it certainly might be ready for a mandate to seriously consider it and propose legislation. Is this something of interest to you?
We were actually on that report.
Right.
And, you know, we spoke to the folks at DHCD that proposed that and put the report together. I think in general, again, if it's a tool that supports redevelopment, we're in support of it. I think there's a long way to go to legislation. I think that why land banks, a state land bank hasn't become a necessity to this point in Vermont, like it has in some other states, in Michigan and Maine, is because we do have other partners like the RDCs and RPCs that can assume that role and hold that liability and get the cleanup in the brownfield that is one of the goals of a land bank in many locations. Not saying that there isn't another tool needed. I think that a land bank, you know, the new funding, the new mechanism to support the staff, you know, you're going to be competing with other sort of goals that accomplish that, other processes that accomplish that same goal. And I couldn't tell you which one's more efficient. You know, we have a tax sale process, which just last year lengthened for municipalities. And when you have properties that are sitting on the municipal tax rolls that are not paying their taxes, and you need to now wait 3 years to take the tax sale, and then you go through a process of redemption. I'm not sure how a land bank is going to speed that up. You know, if they're given money and then they bid at the tax sale and can acquire it, the interest of the municipality is that those taxes are paid because we've already paid in advance the state 80% of those taxes. All those years we're still paying where we can't collect the municipal taxes. So any effort of a land bank to sort of wipe out those backed fees and taxes and sewer and water, you know, delinquencies are only going to hurt the budgets of municipalities if it's structured in the wrong way. And so I think there's a lot to still unpack.
Yeah. Did you guys take a position on the extension of the lengthening of the tax sales?
We opposed it.
Sure, we did. Yes.
Yeah.
There was a lot of reasons to from some advocacy groups to sort of do this work to protect lower income property owners. And we don't disagree that is a worthy goal, but the efforts to do that could be addressed with a small fund to help, not to burden the rest of the property taxpayers with not being able to collect property taxes on properties. And the sort of examples used weren't really very common. There's a lot of property tax sales that are for vacant and abandoned land, for out-of-state owners and own a parcel of landlocked land that goes on for years and years before they pay them. And so there really, if you look at the data, was very, very few cases where there was a low-income Vermont property owner that was losing their home due to municipal tax sale.
Well, a thought, it just occurs to me, and I'm wondering, in light of what you're saying, and I'm wondering how you feel about it. If we were to have legislation that asked DHCD, for example, to study this issue and come back to us in November, say, with proposal for legislation, maybe we should make it broader than simply a land bank and say legislation to address vacant homes, which would, I don't know, abandoned homes, which would allow you to go in and add to that possibly tailored legislation that would help housing. Just a thought, Joe.
Yeah, no, just something to throw out there. Something that never gets in the conversation, I don't think, is there's a whole lot of abandoned homes in this state that pay their property tax every year.
That's what I was just. gonna say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's the eminent domain thing conversation that happens, I'm sure, in more than just my town of. And should we, but if somebody's paying their taxes every year on a piece of property just because it's abandoned and, it's. a
That's
tough
their
one.
choice.
That's a tough one. And there's a lot of them.
I think if the goals of this land bank initiative are to redevelop and put in productive use more property to support housing, that your question around expanding other tools is a good one. Because we have municipalities that are trying to address this issue by adding, more fees to properties that are sitting vacant. And like, they're struggling with this issue because they don't have all the tools. And you're right, that some folks do pay their property taxes, and as the value of that property declines, their property taxes decline. So it's not a very large burden if you're sitting on that for some opportunity to come along for redevelopment and to, turn a profit. And there's just not enough tools in the toolbox to do what we want often. There's a study that was proposed about a land value tax that if you're in a downtown with water and sewer, you should be taxed on the size of your property. That your acreage, not the actual to encourage you to invest. So you're not going to be overtaxed by using your half acre to the maximum extent. You should just pay on the acreage because the public services that have been provided to you, water, sewer, sidewalks, that's all constant on your square footage of your acreage. We should be encouraging you to invest, not penalizing you with more taxes. So there's lots of different discussions out there how to accomplish the same goal.
I'm happy to pull and provide to you all by email, but when we provided testimony just last week to House Ways and Means, there was testimony as well from an attorney named Alan Bierke.
Yeah.
He looked at all of the tax sales from last year using public records, found that in only 2 cases was that someone residing there, but just provides detailed information about those parcels. It was very informative, I think, and illustrative of sort of what municipalities are up against in trying to realize the potential of these properties through the tax sale process. And not just for recovering the delinquent taxes, but to see them put into good and best use. Something else I wanted to say is within VLCT's sort of originating priorities going into this session, that's in this bill that we shouldn't sort of glaze over, it's super relevant to this conversation, is the brownfield program. The investments, the pandemic era investments made by the state in that program were really well felt at the municipal level. We've received a lot of really positive feedback, and that has been a very productive tool for doing this type of work and redevelopment.
I've heard from a number of developers that said, if there is an adequate brownfield money, I'm not doing redevelopment in your downtowns and historic because they all need cleanup and we can't absorb that cost. So if we really want those goals, the brownfield program checks all the boxes. And I think it doesn't really get the resources. It's an afterthought. Oh, we should put some more money into this. And my mind is spinning a little bit with the basic goal and what this study could do. Because if you think about what we started talking about, different incentives to help infrastructure and increase development, and we were talking about tax increment financing and tax stabilization, and what we have a whole slate of in the state are incentives, tax incentives not to develop, right? And what we don't have is the right toolbox for tax incentives to develop where we want to develop to encourage that reinvestment, reuse, and not penalize you for creating a public good. And I think that's a larger question that I've struggled with for a long time in this role, that we have lots of incentives. We give a lot of education funding away to not to stop development, but we don't have the right
Could you
tools.
give an example of that? I'm not sure I know what.
Current use.
There's, yeah, current use, and there's a bill that's been introduced, that is exciting for us, that would allow someone with land in the current use program to withdraw a portion of it without penalty if it's for the development of workforce housing.
Okay,
Really,
Within a certain distance of a developed area already, a village, a downtown.
has that bill reached the floor and been given to a committee
it's
yet?
been sent to committee.
Been sent to committee, but we haven't seen movement.
I believe Ways and Means, but I'm
It's
not,
not here, I don't think.
yeah.
It's in the house.
It'd be encouraged.
So you say House Agriculture isn't.
Or
Right, they're
House
working,
Agriculture.
yeah, I was working on current use.
Yeah.
There's another bill which we support, and relates back to tax sale and blighted properties. Which was, is it 132?
I think so.
I think it's H 132, I believe, introduced by Representative Larry Sakowitz. Which would allow municipalities to recover not just delinquent tax amounts or legal fees, but also the cost of cleaning up hazards, waste, and scrap in the tax sale process. It is something that slows it all down. I mean, if a municipality, even just to bring something to tax sale, has to confront serious hazards and cleanup, they may not even initiate that process for
And they
some
sit
time.
because they're gonna own those expenses. Think
Mhm.
multiple cars, think of what we all do in our life and how these have environmental impacts. You've got to clean that all up, and that cost can't be recouped. It prevents some action sometimes. You want us to skip to the other pieces?
So I do want to ask you one other question, because these are all important for us. I mean, it's just intrinsic to housing that it involves multiple committees, so we know that. And are trying to work collaboratively here.
Yeah.
One of the issues is you testify, I'm talking now about short-term rentals.
Mhm.
Okay. In your first testimony, when you addressed short-term rentals, your position was, don't do something statewide. Let towns, each town is a different situation, let towns deal with it themselves. What I'd like to know, I wonder if you have an opinion, that do towns now have the authority they need to either to regulate, prohibit, tax, et cetera, short-term rentals like Burlington has done, or does it have to be in their charter and they can't do it without general authority?
The simplest, well, if you're talking about the regulation that would leverage certain types of fees and taxes, then the short answer is no, they do not have that authority unless they've achieved it through a unique charter process. Burlington is the only one I'm aware of that has. Generally, municipalities do have some ability to regulate through code.
Mhm.
But of course, that necessitates robust processes such as zoning and bylaw. You have to have the enforcement system
Right.
at the local level, including inspectors.
The
So,
capacity.
yeah, the capacity. And even we hear from municipalities that use, and Burlington uses a third party sort of monitor of short-term rentals, and then takes that information to act through their enforcement under ordinance. That is a particular challenge in the rural communities and especially in the ski towns because of these large condo developments that are all identical. Because the information that's provided to them is like a picture of a door from the Airbnb post. And there might be 50 doors that look just like that are at the same address. So it's even with the use of these really sort of nifty, even if the listing vendor like Airbnb or VBRO is playing ball and working with the municipality on enforcement, even if they are able to leverage in an affordable way these other tools, it still takes a lot of time and resource that's human within the town to be able to even just do basic regulation for fire safety.
Right.
So I think of it this way, why we sort of emphasize the ability to collect taxes and income being what we were speaking towards, because there are through regulation, policy, ordinance, the ability to force registration.
Regulate it,
force
they can regulate it. They
Exactly.
can't tax it.
Exactly. So who's paying for that if you can't tax it?
Well,
And you can recoup some through the registration fees, but it takes resources
Are
and.
you sufficiently interested in this to provide us language as to granting authority to tax?
Yeah.
That's, the sooner the better.
Okay, Josh is on vacation. I'll do
What do you mean?
it.
He's here right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, we have something to build off of that was just enacted last year.
Yeah.
100% surcharge. It's just
Yeah.
adding state.
I know. Well,
Municipality.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's another, I'll throw out for reaction, some suggestion that has come from local communities that have a 1% local option tax on one of the three, is that they've asked for the ability to apply a meals and rooms tax only to short-term rentals. So that may be,
So a surcharge.
yeah. So, yeah, like a 1% local option tax, but if they could exempt traditional lodging, the reason being those, like their employers, they're paying all different sorts of other types of taxes and fees to the municipality and to the state. They're big, important employers, yeah.
I do want you to be able to move on,
Yeah.
but I just want to say the reason behind this is I think we, at least I and some of us have taken to heart your idea that every town is different. You know, there are towns that really want it and there are towns that really don't. And we just want to make sure that towns that don't have the charter capability really have the authority they need, whatever that is, that we put in state law.
Yeah,
Yeah,
All right,
excellent. Thank
go
you.
ahead.
We'll be
Okay.
quick.
super quick. So we, of course, it's probably safe for you to assume, we support all investment from the state in municipal infrastructure. Certainly support this proposal for the revolving loan fund. Bond Bank is a trusted partner. Love everything about it. Here are some things to consider. That expanding eligible activities to include beyond planning and design, also project management and including financial and grants management. As previously discussed, these funding stacks are very complex. They often include more than one debt source, more than one grant source. Municipal finance is bound up in the various limits of their authority. And this is something we hear constantly that municipalities need in order to navigate these projects.
So it's got planning and design now in the language, but you want project management and finance and grants management.
Yeah, this is contained in the bill within the application criteria part. Consider expanding the geographic also application criteria to include settlement areas, villages, and fire districts. Not every municipality has both a fire district and municipal wastewater and water, but many have fire districts. Killington has a huge fire
Could you give us
district.
an underscored amendment that would address what you're saying?
Sure.
Okay. As in, like by midnight tonight?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. It's only Friday.
I'm just making a note, application criteria.
Of course, if you had additional funding,
Yeah,
I
right.
think that this infrastructure piece doesn't fill holes in project gaps. It addresses a underlying
Right.
need.
Well, and what we hear from the bond bank is they can multiply the money in various ways, buying down interest rates, other credit enhancements, but I'm curious if you wanted to be, if you wanted to write a check, but a reasonable one, do you have a number in mind?
Ask Michael Don.
Yeah.
I mean, what we're prepared to discuss is the need, which we know is north of several hundred million.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think one of the things that I've learned from you all that I keep when I'm talking to folks about this is that piece right there. That's how much we need to continue to keep up with our goals and demand. And if there's projects that need that much money to do so, and this would give it that life.
But that is, just to clarify, that 240 million is only for those 35 projects. is that right?
correct.
Okay, so.
And it's not necessarily for housing.
It's not necessarily for housing, but again, we live now in the context of Act 181. Which means,
So it
so,
was in the survey was in the
Well,
context of 180.
no, I'm saying that now with the reality that density is connected to municipal water and wastewater, expansions to municipal water and wastewater inherently enable housing
It's,
at density.
you
Yes.
can't restrict it once you,
Yeah. But yes, these are not necessarily project bound in the way like a HIT.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Okay, so quickly, I'm actually gonna start here, if that's okay. So on the proposal to allow the adoption of municipal preemptions into local zoning and bylaw, we support the option. Some municipalities may choose to endeavor a community process if they'd like to go beyond what becomes prescribed in future changes to state law. We heard a lot of conflicting anecdotes over the summer and fall about municipalities' willingness or attitudes towards the new local preemptions in Act 47 and 181. So we looked into it, and in the same survey that provided that infrastructure information, certainly the majority of municipalities where these changes are applicable had already adopted them through a local process. 13% responded that they had, quote, not started, and the reasons that they provided, and it was pretty even, where they were currently working through other zoning priorities. They lacked the technical assistance, in most cases provided by the RPC, and they had a lack of funding for a planning grant to do the work. So for those reasons, we support this proposal to allow these changes to be adopted by a legislative action.
The option of doing it without
Yeah.
hearing is, we've received language from one RPC suggesting that towns be granted the authority to contract with RPCs in order to prepare the ordinances.
In order to prepare ordinances.
Yeah, the mandated ordinances, and also for other purposes. Do they have that authority now?
They do.
I think they have that.
I think they do, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
And so about half and half of the municipalities that are compliant with the new preemptions, their local zoning and bylaw actually exceeds the state requirement in favor of more housing and at higher density. So this may sort of dispel some myths about what's happening within local zoning and bylaw. Municipalities are working really hard to realize housing. On appeals. Anyone do this?
Yeah, so generally we support the efforts to sort of rein in appeals. And the one area we're a little concerned is whether local municipal panels can predictably sort of get through it if you put a 60-day measurement. I'm on a local board, and we have a hard time getting quorum some months. Something happens. Like we're afraid of some of the consequences if they know there's a deadline. They either don't support the project because they can't get through it. So that's just a reality that you're dealing with a lot of volunteers and folks and putting hard and fast time frame on them.
I may be wrong. I think an early draft may
Okay, I have
have been inclusive of municipalities. The current draft, or the one I saw last night, did not. It only applied to the environmental division. But we'd just like to say, don't put it to.
You're flagging it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see here, the,
Wait, did we do this? I'm getting. That's a 20% we're saying just.
the 20%, yeah, we support raising the threshold to 20% of the population. We know that 20 was just up from a few years ago of 10, so having more people that don't have, direct abutters or direct impact by the project, if they want to appeal it, it needs to be, we support the raise to 20% of the population.
And would support.
How would do you have any reaction to a proposal, which I personally favor? I don't know if it will make it into the committee bill, which would simply say that anyone who appeals has to be aggrieved, the standing requirement. It just says that as to that whole group of people who are not abutters, I mean, that the entire, the current Act 250 policy, which is a standard standing policy that says you just can't appeal unless you're an aggrieved party and it has to be specific. Is this something you would consider?
Yeah, and that the LCT has held that position in the past and many times over.
The who? The LCT.
The LCT, yeah.
Okay.
Although for municipal permits as well as for Act 250
Yes,
permits.
yes. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes,
And in some ways, don't you think that might be superior and that it would, I mean, the 20% and the $50,000 are a way of trying to limit this group
yes,
of anybody can appeal. And so one option is just to say, well, no, anybody can't appeal, that it has to be an aggrieved party.
yes,
Okay, thank you.
absolutely. And I mean, the reason is not because we don't like appellants. The reason is because municipalities want to see projects that meet the community's vision. We have robust processes that set comprehensive municipal plans, that set zoning and bylaw. There are numerous opportunities for every member of the community to be heard in those processes. Once they are decided, those projects and that vision should be realized.
So exhaustion of administrative remedies would say people have to participate in that process in order to appeal. Is that applied now?
I don't believe so, and that concerns us. We're concerned about the municipal liability for an appellant to potentially claim, well, you had the meeting on a Wednesday at 5, and that's when I am at my bridge tournament or whatever, so we're concerned, there are strict requirements now. They are good, they work, they
Okay.
develop robust public process.
One more question, real
Yeah.
quick, and that is, when the concept of a housing court was introduced,
Mhm.
because there is a bill on our wall about a housing court, we were discussing the whole problem of de novo review generically as being very time consuming and repetitive. Well, but the problem is very often there is no record at the local level. And so I'm wondering how you would react to a solution, and this isn't gonna happen, I don't think, in the next 2 weeks. But how would you react to a solution that says that there's an option to go with review on the record if there's a record, and give the developer the option of whether they want to pay to have a court reporter in the room?
I would have to check, but I believe we discussed this last year and would support that. I believe that was in talking with our municipal attorneys, that we agree that it does waste some time. There are some processes that practically create a record, but they don't officially get to count towards a de novo. So I believe that's our position, but I could check.
Thank you.
We would like to say something about Act 250 appeals, if that's okay. We understand the approach in this committee bill to accelerate, but ultimately defer to the study that was initiated through Act 181. We have some suggestions about broadening the scope of that to maybe support a productive process in the next session.
Running the scope of the study.
Yeah. But also consider in the interim, just like we have interim Act 250 exemptions that are proving to work really well and produce housing, consider commensurate changes to the appeal process as are proposed for municipal permits in this bill for Act 250, while that more deliberate process moves forward. And then in the study, some ideas that you could think about to expand the purview of the report looking at Act 250 permit appeals would be to look at standing. I don't believe that's currently in the language for appellants. To examine better the cost and impact of permit defense on builders and on the public. And for your information, there have been many studies on Act 250 in the past. One prior study produced by DHCD in 2017 did look at the exemptions that existed then, which were primarily the priority housing project exemptions, and found that just having an exemption saved those housing projects $50,000 in permit fees only and 7 months of time in their construction timeline, which is significant.
So what saved that?
Being exempt.
Being
from
exempt
that.
from Act 250.
Right, okay.
Those who work on both on the municipal side and as builders and developers have long said that that does not come close to representing the true cost to the project for permit defense. Because at each layer of review and appeal process, and especially when there are successive and numerous appeals for the same project, you're having to trot out engineers, lawyers, transportation engineers, environmental engineers, and project managers, professional staff on the building side, professional staff on the municipal side. And that may provide the evidence to move forward with more robust appeals reforms in the future for Act 250.
Thank you. Is that?
I think
That's it.
Any questions
Yeah.
by the committee? This has been very helpful.
I was gonna
really.
say this has been extremely helpful. Thank you.
And we really appreciate this
Yeah.
bill. We
Yeah.
appreciate the repeat invitations. Certainly a top priority for municipalities all across Vermont. We really love the attention that it's getting this session and.
And
hope can-
we know you can't do everything, you know,
Yeah.
you're trying to figure out where you can get, what you can get done, and we appreciate that. And we appreciate that it's a complex topic that involves almost every committee to get the full scope and realize that there's challenges in making that happen.
Well, something to consider, just not to consider, something you probably already know, but you should know, is that that's exactly our problem, is that we have ideas that would go into energy. We have ideas that go into commerce. We have ideas that go into GovOps. We have ideas that go into environment.
Mhm.
Some of that can be resolved by what seems to be called these days a drive-by, but some of it really can't. And that means, as a practical matter, this bill, which will already have to go to appropriation and have to go to Ways and Means,
Mhm.
it can't do any more than that.
Mhm.
So it may be that some of these issues, literally, we cannot resolve this round, but we'll try to address after crossover when the Senate bill comes to us.
Appreciate that.
So it isn't over till it's over.
No.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next witness is,
Can we have a break?
we have, no, we're gonna have,
Oh, no, I thought it said that on the schedule.
oh, no, I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Okay, so we're reconvening at 11 o'clock in order to hear Al, I'm sorry, you were so
Classic.
right, yeah. Alex and I'm Alex and Chris Cochran, Alex Fair.